My name is Mrs. Natalie Watson, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a small apartment with my husband. We've been married for 3 years and usually get along well. However, I've been feeling unhappy with him lately. It's not just my husband that bothers me, it's also his parents. They have a close relationship, and we visit their house about once a week. At first, I thought it was nice that he was so caring towards his family, but every time we go there, my in-laws ask me, "When will you quit your job? A woman's job is to take care of the home." Over time, I started to dislike these visits. I enjoy my job and want to keep working, and I told my husband this before we got married. When his parents criticize me, my husband doesn't even look at me or stand up for me. This made me dread going to their house, and I sometimes told my husband, "Why don't you just go by yourself?" But he would reply, "My parents want to see you too," and make me go with him. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I couldn't tell his parents how I felt. All I could do was smile and ignore their comments. What bothered me the most was when his parents asked, "Why don't you have a child?" I like kids and think having one would be nice, but I know that having a child is not something that can't just happen because someone wants it. I couldn't understand why I should have a child just to please them. I really wanted them to stop bothering me. I tried to talk to my husband about this too, but he just said, "Don't worry about it. They're just concerned," and didn't do anything to help. This made me even more frustrated because I felt like I was dealing with everything alone. My mother-in-law said something I couldn't handle. She asked if I was infertile, since I still hadn't had a child. My father-in-law looked at me like I had done something wrong and asked if I had kept my infertility a secret when I married their son. I couldn't take it anymore. I had been smiling and putting up with their comments, but now I stopped smiling and said, "I'll undergo infertility treatment if you promise not to bring this up again." I was surprised by my own words, but realized how stressed I had been. Then, my husband finally spoke up. He said, "I don't think we need fertility treatments. We're still young, and we shouldn't force ourselves to have a child. Fertility treatments cost money, and I want to enjoy our time together as a couple." I took his words to mean he was thinking of me. One weekday, I took a paid leave to go to the gynecologist. The pressure from my in-laws about having a child had lessened, but I wanted to know if I was really infertile. I thought about asking my husband, but he got upset whenever I brought up fertility treatments, so I decided to go alone. The exam went quickly, and I scheduled an appointment for the results a week later. On my way out, I saw a pregnant woman in the waiting room. I recognized her and stopped. She came over and asked if I was Natalie. When we called each other's names, I realized she was Clara, a classmate from elementary and middle school. Clara was 9 months pregnant, and she had just finished her checkup. I decided to walk her home, and I was surprised to find out that she lived near me and that her husband worked at the same company as mine. As we caught up and talked about old times, I couldn't help but notice Clara's big belly. She noticed me looking and asked if I wanted to touch it. I hesitated but then asked if it was okay, and she said, "Of course." I gently touched her belly. I remembered that Clara used to have a slim waist, and now she had grown so much. I was amazed that there was a baby inside her. After a while, I felt a little movement in her belly. Surprised, I looked up at Clara and asked if that was the baby moving. She smiled and said it was. I was amazed and said, "That's incredible." Clara was already glowing like a mother. Suddenly, I found myself saying, "I'm envious," realizing I might have said too much. I quickly looked away. Clara, who was sensitive to emotions, noticed something was off and asked, "Did something happen?" I hesitated but decided to be honest and told her about my in-laws and the pressure about having children. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I ended up telling Clara everything, including the fertility test I had taken at the clinic that day. I worried I might have said too much, but I felt a strange relief in sharing my feelings with her. I think I just needed someone to listen to the frustrations I had been holding in for the past few years. Clara listened quietly and nodded as I spoke. After I finished, she said, "You've been holding this in for so long. You've handled it well. If it were me, I couldn't have held back, and I would have cut ties with my in-laws. I realized she was right. He had been under a lot of stress. I feel a bit relieved after talking to you, Clara, I said with a light laugh. At least my husband stood by my side, which is a small comfort. But Clara's expression was still tense, and I was confused about why she looked that way. I called her name, and after a moment of hesitation, she said, "It's about your husband. It might be better not to tell him about the test for now." Ah, I blinked at Clara's unexpected words. I was curious about why she said that, so I asked her directly. Then Clara started to tell me something shocking. I couldn't process what she said and somehow made it home, feeling unsteady. Once I got home, I sat on the sofa, thinking about what Clara had told me. I didn't want to believe it, but I also couldn't imagine Clara lying. Plus, I had been feeling unsure about my husband's behavior. If what Clara said was true, I wouldn't be able to forgive him. I decided I needed to find out the truth. My husband and I were visiting my in-laws after a long time. While my husband and his parents were enjoying tea and snacks, my mother-in-law suddenly asked, "So, when will you quit your job, Natalie?" Normally, I would have replied that I had no plans to quit, but this time was different. I said, "I suppose I'll quit when we have a child." My mother-in-law blinked in surprise and said, "Well, you finally decided to have a child." My father-in-law excitedly added, "Oh, well, I finally get to hold a grandchild." But my husband glanced at me and made a face that said not to say unnecessary things. He replied, "Well, having a child is a blessing, so we don't know if it will happen right away." My husband reacted just as I expected. I looked at him and said, "Actually, I went to the gynecologist the other day and got my infertility test results." I showed him the paper that stated there were no issues. "I'm starting to want a child too. You'll cooperate for your parents' sake, right?" He looked back and forth between the test results and my face, then turned bright red and yelled, "I'm not taking any infertility treatments. I won't get tested either." His parents were shocked by his sudden outburst, but I understood that what Claire had said was true, and it left me feeling disappointed. "Hey, do you know Mr. Howard?" I asked. My husband looked surprised and wondered how I knew him. I decided to tell him while waiting for his response. "His wife is my friend? Apparently, you've been saying things at work like, my wife is a defective product who can't have children due to infertility. She's given up on being a woman and only focuses on work. I'm so pitiful to have married someone like her." I looked at him with a cold gaze I had never used before. His mouth trembled, and he became defensive. "So what if it's true? Who else would want someone like you?" Watching my furious husband, I felt my feelings for him start to cool. I began to wonder what I ever saw in him. I calmly pointed to the test results on the table and said, "I just proved there's no problem with me, right?" He stayed silent, so I brought up something that had been bothering me. "Could it be that you're the one with issues? Is that why you've been stubbornly refusing infertility treatments and testing?" That's when my mother-in-law, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. "There's no way that's true. There can be a problem with my son. If there's a problem, it's with you." Her face turned red as she grabbed the test results and said, "These must be fake." She then tore them up. My husband looked surprised by his mother's actions, but then he agreed. "Yeah, that's right. There's no way I have a problem." He and his parents started blaming me. Realizing there was no point in continuing the conversation, I slammed the divorce papers on the table and said, "Then please divorce me. Why don't you find a much better wife than me?" My husband replied, "Yeah, that's right. I'll find a much better wife than you." Angrily, he filled out the divorce papers, and his parents didn't try to stop him as I watched him fill out the papers without any emotion. I felt a sense of joy at breaking ties with all three of them. Once he finished, I quickly grabbed the papers and said, "Well then, goodbye." Before hurrying out of my in-laws' house, I thought I heard someone call out behind me, but I figured it was just my imagination. I went straight to City Hall and submitted the divorce papers. A few days later, I moved out of the apartment we had shared and into my company dormitory, since I was the only one who signed the lease for the apartment. and had already prepared for this day. The move went smoothly. I packed my husband's belongings in cardboard boxes and sent them to his parents' house with cash on delivery. Once I got settled into the company dormitory, I received a call from my ex-husband. I wondered what he wanted this time. When I answered, he immediately yelled, "Why did you submit the divorce papers? Why did you move out of the apartment?" I wanted to ask why he was bringing this up now. I calmly explained, "Don't say things that don't make sense. You agreed to and filled out the divorce papers, right? I signed the lease for the apartment, so I moved out since we divorced." But my ex-husband wouldn't listen. He kept insisting, "Take back the divorce. Let's submit new marriage papers. Where are you living now? Let's live together again." He kept saying more crazy things. I couldn't take it anymore. So I said, "Okay, I'm hanging up now. Don't ever call me again." I tried to end the call, but my ex threatened, "If you don't tell me where you're living, I'll go to your company." I was fed up and replied, "You'll be the one in trouble if you cause any problems," before hanging up the phone. Still, I wasn't sure he wouldn't come to my company, so I talked to my boss about my ex-husband just in case. Neither my boss nor I thought he would actually do anything, but he ended up causing a scene. I later learned it from the security guard that he went wild in the company lobby, and the police had to be called. I felt a lot of shame and guilt, but my coworker understood and told me that breaking up with my ex was the right choice. Later, I heard from Claire's husband that my ex-husband panicked when his company found out about the police incident and tried to make me look bad. However, Claire's husband set the record straight, and the lies my ex had told about me were exposed. It turned out he had a hard time at his job after that and ended up quitting. Now, he's probably back at his parents' house, crying to them. Honestly, even though it sounds a bit harsh, I think it must be tough for them to support a son who is unemployed and divorced, but then doesn't matter to me anymore since he feels like a stranger now. Since then, I've been free from unnecessary stress and focused on my work. I have more time and money to enjoy life. I visit Claire sometimes to check on her, and we make plans to spoil her baby. She often finds it funny and shakes her head at me. As for remarrying, I'm not thinking about that just yet, but I do hope that someday I can have a happy family of my own.